The mining colony was always loud during the day, but at night it turned into a silent graveyard. The machines stopped, the streets emptied, and only the sound of cold wind moved through the narrow alleys. Mark, a tired human worker, walked home after another long shift. His boots echoed on the broken pavement. He carried nothing with him, just the weight of exhaustion and hunger. He passed through an old alley that most people avoided. Rumors said strange things happened there, things no one wanted to talk about. But Mark used it because it was shorter, and he was too tired to care about rumors. As he walked, he heard something unusual. At first it sounded like a weak scratching noise. He froze, listening carefully. Then came a soft whimper like a cry. He frowned. Maybe a wounded animal? Stray creatures sometimes hid in sacks and trash piles. He stepped closer, the sound pulling him forward. There, in the shadow of a rusted dumpster, lay a sack. It was tied at the top, thrown aside like garbage. The sound was coming from inside. Mark's chest tightened. He told himself it was probably just an animal. He should keep walking. He had no time for trouble, but then the sack moved. It trembled. And from within, a voice so faint he thought he imagined it whispered one word. "Mom." Mark's breath caught. He stepped back, his eyes wide. That wasn't an animal. That was a child. He crouched down, his calloused hands reaching for the sack. The knot was tight, as if someone had tied it deliberately to keep whatever was inside from escaping. His fingers worked quickly, pulling the string loose. The smell of dirt and fear escaped from within. He opened the sack carefully, ready to see something terrible. Inside, curled up and shaking, was a small alien girl. Her skin glowed faintly in the dark, pale blue with silver veins. Her eyes were large, too large for her thin face, and they shimmered with faint light. Her clothes were torn rags, barely covering her small body. She looked weak, fragile, like she hadn't eaten in days. The girl blinked at him, eyes full of terror. She tried to crawl backward, but there was nowhere to go. She whispered again, her lips trembling. "Mom?" Mark froze. His heart pounded in his chest. She thought he was her mother. He shook his head slightly, whispering back, "No, I'm not." But the words felt useless. The child didn't understand. She only saw a face, a figure that opened the sack and let her breathe again. Mark looked around the alley. Who could have done this? Who would throw a child, an alien child, into a sack and leave her here to die? His stomach turned. He thought about the miners, the locals who hated outsiders. On this colony, aliens were treated worse than animals. They were called curses, burdens, even demons. It was clear. Someone had abandoned her here, expecting her to die silently in the night. The girl reached out with a trembling hand, touching his sleeve as if to beg him not to leave her. Her tiny fingers glowed faintly against his rough clothes. Mark felt a wave of conflict. He had his own problems. He barely survived each day. Taking her with him would bring danger. The patrols punished humans who sheltered alien children. But then she whispered again, softer than before. "Mom." Her voice cracked like broken glass. Mark closed his eyes. He knew if he walked away now, he would never forget that sound. He would carry it like a wound in his chest for the rest of his life. Slowly, he lifted the girl from the sack. She was light, far too light, like she had been starving for weeks. Her head rested on his shoulder. She let out a weak sigh, as if the fight inside her finally ended. He wrapped the sack around her small body to keep her warm and held her close. His mind raced with fear. What if someone saw him? What if the patrols came? What if she was sick or dangerous? But under all those questions, one truth was louder. She was alive because of him. And if he left her, she would die. Mark stepped out of the alley, the girl in his arms. The night wind cut across his face and the colony lights flickered in the distance. Every step felt heavier than the last. He knew he was walking into trouble, but he also knew something else. For the first time in years, he wasn't walking home alone. Mark pushed open the door of his small cabin, the hinges creaking like old bones. The place was dark and cold, a single light flickering weakly from the ceiling. He rarely cared about the mess inside, but tonight it felt different. He was carrying something fragile, something that didn't belong in a world like his. The alien girl was asleep in his arms. Her breathing was shallow, her head resting against his shoulder. Her skin glowed faintly, giving off a soft light that filled the room. For a moment, Mark just stood there staring at her, unsure what to do next. He laid her gently on the old cot in the corner, The blanket was thin, worn from years of use, but it was all he had. She stirred slightly, whispering something in her sleep, words he couldn't understand. Her language was foreign, soft and musical, but one word kept returning. Mom. Mark sat on the edge of the cot, rubbing his tired face with his hands. He wanted to tell himself this wasn't his problem. He could leave her at the gates of a clinic. Maybe someone would help her. But he knew better. On this colony, alien children weren't treated like children. They were seen as trash, trouble, bad luck. He poured some water into a tin cup and held it to her lips. At first she didn't react, but then her eyes opened, large glowing eyes that seemed to cut through the dark. She sipped weakly, then coughed, but still tried to drink more. Easy, Mark whispered, steadying her small hands around the cup. For the first time, she looked at him clearly. Her gaze was full of confusion, fear, and hope all at once. She whispered again, almost questioning. Mom? Mark shook his head, his voice low but gentle. No, not Mom. I'm Mark, he pointed to his chest. Mark. The girl tilted her head, trying to copy him. Mark. He almost laughed, but the sound died quickly in his throat. It wasn't funny. It was heartbreaking. Hours passed slowly. The girl barely touched the stale bread he offered her, nibbling only a corner. Her stomach growled, but it was like she had forgotten how to eat. Mark felt anger rising inside him, not at her, but at those who left her in that sack. He stepped outside for a moment, needing air. The colony was quiet, the sky above a haze of smoke and faint stars. A neighbor walked past, an old miner with sharp eyes. He gave Mark a suspicious look. You got someone inside? The man asked, narrowing his eyes. Mark forced a casual shrug. Just myself. Same as always. The miner didn't look convinced, but he moved on. Mark's chest tightened. If anyone found out about the girl, things could turn bad fast. When he went back inside, the girl was sitting up, clutching the blanket to her chest. She looked smaller than ever, her thin frame almost swallowed by the fabric. Why? She asked suddenly, her voice weak but clear. Mark blinked. Why, what? She lowered her eyes. Why? Left me, why? No one want me? Her broken words cut deep. She wasn't asking about him. She was asking about the people who abandoned her. She already knew the truth in her heart, but she wanted someone to tell her otherwise. Mark didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with words. He was just a worker, just a man trying to survive. But looking at her trembling hands, he felt a weight he had never carried before. You're not trash, he said finally. His voice was rough but steady. You're not a curse. They were wrong to leave you. You deserve to live. The girl looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then slowly she crawled closer and rested her head against his arm. Her skin was cold, but her trust was warm. Mark sat there frozen, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility. And strangely, belonging. But outside, the world wasn't so kind. Later that night, as Mark tried to rest, voices drifted through the thin cabin walls. A group of miners walked past, drunk and loud. Did you hear? They finally got rid of that cursed brat. Good riddance, she was bringing bad luck to the whole block. Left her in the alleys where she belongs. Hope the rats finish her off. Laughter followed. Cruel, heartless laughter. Mark's fists clenched. He wanted to storm out, to shout at them, to tell them the girl was still alive. But he couldn't, not yet. Protecting her meant staying silent. The girl stirred at the noise, curling into herself on the cot. Mark sat beside her, whispering quietly, Don't listen to them. You're safe here. But even as he said the words, he knew safety was fragile. If the miners discovered she had survived, if the patrols found out he was hiding her, everything would fall apart. For now, all he could do was keep her hidden. He looked down at the small alien girl, her glowing eyes half closed in exhaustion. She trusted him now, even if she still called him Mom. Mark sighed. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure: the child no one wanted was now his responsibility. The small cabin was silent except for the faint sound of the alien girl's breathing. Mark sat on the edge of his broken chair, staring at the door. He had barred it with an old steel pipe, but it felt weak against the dangers outside. The colony was not a kind place, and he knew the girl's presence would soon attract attention. The girl lay on the cot, wrapped in the thin blanket. Her glow was softer now, her body finally resting after days of suffering. But even in her sleep, she whispered, Strange words in her alien tongue mixed with one broken human word. Mom. Mark closed his eyes, pressing his palms to his face. He wanted to tell her again that he wasn't her mother, but he couldn't bring himself to wake her. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe for her, Mom only meant the person who stayed. He moved quietly, checking the corners of the cabin. He pulled old crates against the windows, covering any cracks that could let light out. He even stuffed rags in the holes near the floor, afraid her faint glow might leak through. The girl wasn't safe here, but for now this was all he had. When morning came, Mark had to leave for his shift at the mines. He crouched by the cot, whispering to her, "Stay quiet. Don't open the door. I'll come back." She blinked at him with sleepy, glowing eyes and nodded, though he wasn't sure if she really understood. The entire day, Mark couldn't focus. Every swing of his pickaxe felt heavier. Every sound of the machinery echoed like a warning in his head. What if someone found her? What if she left the cabin searching for him? What if the miners, those who laughed last night, returned to check if she was dead? At lunch break, a group of men sat nearby, talking in low voices. Patrol's been looking for a glowing brat. Heard she didn't die in the sack. Someone must have picked her up. Whoever it is, they're asking for trouble. Mark kept his head down, eating in silence, but his heart hammered. They already suspected. He had to be careful. That night, when he returned, he found the cabin dark and silent. Panic struck him as he pushed open the door. But then he saw her, sitting quietly in the corner, clutching the blanket, waiting for him. The moment she saw his face, she rushed forward, her small arms wrapping around his leg. "Mark," she whispered, her voice fragile but clearer than before. Mark knelt down, lifting her gently. Relief washed over him. She had stayed. She had trusted his words, but danger was already circling closer. Over the next few days, Mark tried to keep her hidden. He smuggled food from the mines, slipping small pieces of bread into his pockets. He carried water in old bottles. He taught her simple words, pointing to objects. "Bread," he said, handing her a piece. She repeated, "Be bread." He pointed to himself. "Mark," she smiled faintly, touching his chest. "Mark." Then she touched her own chest, pausing as if unsure. "Lyra." It was the first time she spoke her own name. Mark repeated it softly. "Lyra." She nodded, pleased, as if giving him a secret. But while the bond between them grew stronger, whispers outside grew louder. Neighbors began noticing things. Strange shadows. A faint glow from under the door. Quiet sounds at night. One evening, as Mark returned, he spotted two men lingering near his cabin. They whispered to each other, pointing at the window. Mark clenched his fists, forcing himself to walk calmly. "You got something in there?" one of them asked with a grin. "Just dust and rats," Mark replied flatly, pushing past them. His tone was sharp enough that they didn't press further, but their eyes followed him with suspicion. Inside, Lyra looked frightened. She had heard them. She clung to him, whispering in her alien tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. Mark sat with her that night, whispering quietly, "You're safe here. I won't let them take you." But deep down, he knew safety was fragile. Already people were watching. The next day, when Mark was at the mines, a patrol officer stopped him. "You live near the alley, don't you?" the officer asked casually. His uniform was clean, his boots shining, a sharp contrast to the dirt-covered miners. Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, why?" "There's been reports. Someone saw light inside your cabin at night. Strange kind of light. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Mark's throat went dry. He forced a tired laugh. "If they saw light, it wasn't mine. I can't even afford proper bulbs. Maybe someone's seeing things." The officer studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Keep it that way. If we find out anyone's hiding the alien brat, there will be consequences." That night, Mark rushed home, his heart racing. Lyra was waiting as always, but her glow seemed brighter, as if her strength was slowly returning. She ran to him, smiling faintly for the first time. "Mark," she said, her voice clearer now. He hugged her tightly, but his mind was filled with fear. The walls were closing in. Neighbors were suspicious. Patrols were asking questions. His cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a trap. One wrong step and both of them would be destroyed. Mark looked at Lyra, her glowing eyes shining with trust. He knew the truth now. Keeping her hidden forever was impossible. And soon the hunters who abandoned her would come back to finish what they started. The nights on the colony grew heavier. Mark could feel it in the air like a storm building just beyond the horizon. Lyra, the alien girl, was slowly gaining her strength. Her glow, once faint, now shimmered more brightly in the dark room. She even laughed sometimes, a small, soft sound that filled the empty cabin with a strange warmth. But Mark knew this warmth couldn't last. He had seen the eyes of his neighbors. He had heard the whispers on the streets. And worst of all, he knew the men who had left her to die were still out there. One evening, while he was returning from the mines, he overheard a group gathered near the corner bar. Their voices carried into the night. "Someone took her," one man hissed. "Impossible, she was locked in that sack," another argued. "No, I heard from patrol. The brat's alive. Someone's keeping her hidden." Mark froze, his heart pounding. He kept walking, pretending not to hear, but their words dug into his chest like knives. That night he sat in the cabin, staring at Lyra as she ate bread with her tiny hands. She looked peaceful, unaware of the danger closing in. Mark wanted to tell her everything, that the world outside hated her, that people wanted her gone, but how could he? She was just a child. Still, Lyra sensed something. She looked at him with those glowing eyes and asked softly, "Scared?" Mark blinked. "You can tell?" She nodded slowly. "Scared." "Mark." He sighed, brushing a hand over his face. "Yeah, I'm scared. But I'm not scared for me. I'm scared for you." She tilted her head, confused, but then reached out and placed her small hand over his. "Safe," she whispered. With Mark? Safe. His chest tightened. He wanted to believe her words, but safety was already slipping away. The hunters returned 3 nights later. Mark woke to a noise outside, the crunch of boots on gravel, the low murmur of voices. His body tensed instantly. He reached for the iron pipe he kept near the bed. Lyra stirred on the cot, her glow faint with fear. "Mark," she whispered. He held a finger to his lips. "Shh." Through the cracks in the boarded window, he saw shadows moving. 3 figures. They carried lanterns and blades. Their voices were low, but the words cut through the night. "Check the cabins. She's here somewhere." I can feel it. Mark's blood ran cold. They weren't just guessing. They were hunting. He moved quickly, whispering to Lyra, "Hide. Under the floor." He pulled aside an old rug, revealing a loose wooden board he had prepared days ago. Beneath it was a shallow crawl space, just big enough for her small body. She hesitated, clinging to him. "Mark, I'll be right here," he whispered firmly. "You'll be safe, go." Tears welled in her glowing eyes, but she obeyed, crawling into the dark space. He replaced the board and the rug, heart pounding. Moments later, the door rattled violently. "Open up, Mark," a rough voice demanded. "We know you're in there." Mark gripped the iron pipe, forcing his voice steady. "What do you want?" The door shuddered again, and then with a loud crack it burst open. The 3 hunters stormed inside, their eyes wild, their blades catching the lantern light. One of them sneered. "Where is she?" Mark stood his ground. "Who? Don't play dumb." The glowing brat. "We left her in the sack. She didn't die. Someone took her, and all the signs point here." Mark's grip tightened on the pipe. His pulse thundered in his ears. He knew lying might not save him, but he had no choice. "You think I'd risk my neck for some alien kid?" he growled. "Search if you want. You'll find nothing." They spread out, tearing through the small cabin. They overturned crates, kicked the cot, ripped open the cupboard. One even stabbed his blade into the wall, listening for hollow sounds. Mark fought to keep his breathing steady. Beneath the floor, Lyra stayed silent, but he could imagine her small body trembling in the dark. Finally, one of the hunters turned back to him. "If you're hiding her, you're dead. She's cursed. Everyone knows it. That thing doesn't belong here." Mark raised the pipe slightly, his voice low and dangerous. "If she doesn't belong here, neither do you. Get out." The room grew tense. For a moment it seemed the hunters might attack, but then one spat on the floor, muttering, "Not worth it tonight." They left with heavy steps, slamming the door behind them. Mark dropped the pipe, his hands shaking. He fell to his knees, pulling aside the rug and lifting the board. Lyra crawled out, her face pale, her eyes wet with silent tears. She clung to him instantly, burying her face in his chest. "I was scared," she whispered. Mark held her tightly, his voice rough but steady. "So was I, but you're safe. I won't let them touch you." Yet even as he said the words, he knew this was only the beginning. The hunters had returned. They knew she was alive, and they would not stop until she was gone forever. Mark looked out the window into the dark colony streets. He understood the truth now. Keeping her hidden wasn't enough anymore. If they wanted to survive, he would have to fight. The attack from the hunters left Mark's cabin in ruins. Crates were smashed, dishes broken, and the door hung loosely from one hinge. He sat in silence for a long time after they left, holding Lyra close. Her small body trembled against his chest, but slowly. Her breathing calmed. Outside, the colony slept in ignorance, unaware of the secret hidden in his cabin. But Mark knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters returned with more men. He needed a plan, yet his tired mind could think of nothing except the fragile child clinging to him. "Mark," Lyra whispered, her voice weak. "Hungry?" He forced a small smile, brushing her silver hair back. "I'll get you something." He found a half loaf of bread and a small tin of water. She ate slowly, like every bite was work. But when she finished, her skin glowed brighter. Mark frowned. The glow wasn't just faint light. It seemed alive, moving under her skin like rivers of silver. That night as she slept, he noticed something else. Her small cuts and bruises, the ones from the sack and rough handling, were gone. He remembered how pale and weak she had been only days ago, but now her body looked stronger, her face fuller. She was healing faster than any human child could. Mark leaned closer, studying her. "What are you?" he whispered to the sleeping girl. The next morning, he got his answer. Mark went to fetch water from the colony well. On his way back, 2 patrol guards stopped him. Mark once said, his eyes sharp, "We've had reports of strange lights in this sector. You wouldn't know anything, would you?" Mark's grip tightened on the water jug. "Lights? Only thing glowing in my cabin is my old lamp. It flickers sometimes," the guard smirked. "If you say so. But let me give you a warning. If we find out you're hiding that alien brat, there won't be a trial. You'll be executed slowly." Mark forced himself to stay calm, nodding. "Understood." He hurried back to the cabin, fear clawing at his chest. When he entered, he nearly dropped the jug. Lyra was awake and she was floating, only a few inches off the cot, but enough to freeze him in shock. Her eyes were closed, her small body glowing brighter than ever. She whispered words in her alien tongue, her voice echoing like a song. The air around her shimmered. Then, as suddenly as it started, she dropped back onto the cot, breathing heavily. Her glow dimmed to normal. "Lyra," Mark whispered, stepping forward. What was that?" She opened her eyes, confused. As if she didn't fully understand either. She looked at him, tilting her head. "Safe, Mark?" He knelt beside her. "Always. But you need to tell me. What's happening to you?" She touched her chest where her veins glowed faintly. "Blood different. Mother say, gift." Mark's stomach tightened. A gift, more like a target. If the hunters or patrol learned she had powers, they wouldn't just kill her, they'd use her. "Does anyone else know?" he asked. Lyra shook her head, her eyes full of sadness. "Mother hide me. People hate me. Say cursed." Mark felt a wave of anger. They didn't just abandon her out of fear. They abandoned her because of what she carried inside. Something they didn't understand. Something they feared. That night, the colony streets were restless. Mark heard drunken voices outside talking about rewards. Bounty on the glowing brat. "Patrol says anyone who brings her in alive gets credits. Dead or alive, doesn't matter." Mark's blood ran cold. There was a price on her head now. Inside, Lyra sat quietly, playing with a piece of cloth. She looked up at him, sensing his worry. "Bad men come?" "Yes," Mark admitted. He knelt in front of her, gripping her small hands. "But listen to me. You are not cursed. You're not bad. What's in your blood? It makes you special." Her eyes filled with tears. "Special, but alone." Mark swallowed hard. He remembered his own life. Years of working, no family, no purpose beyond surviving day to day. "Until her. Not alone anymore," he said firmly. "You have me, and I won't let anyone take you." Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, whispering softly, "Safe with Dad." Mark froze. The word hit him like a strike to the heart. She had always called him Mom, but now, for the first time, she called him Dad. His eyes burned, and he held her tightly, as if the world would rip her away if he let go. But outside, danger was moving closer. The hunters wanted revenge. The patrols wanted the bounty. And now, whispers spread that the alien girl's blood could change everything if used. It could cure diseases, heal wounds, maybe even grant power. Her secret was no longer safe, and Mark knew the fight to protect her had only just begun. The bounty spread like fire. By the next day, every drunk miner, every desperate worker, every hungry scavenger in the colony knew there was a reward for the alien girl. Alive or dead, it didn't matter. Mark felt the weight of every eye on him when he walked through the streets. Whispers followed him. Doors closed quickly when he passed. He could feel the walls closing in, the hunters drawing nearer with every hour. That night, as he sat in the cabin with Lyra, he made his decision. They couldn't stay. He crouched in front of her, speaking softly but firmly. "Lyra, we have to leave this place, tonight." Her glowing eyes widened. "Leave, go where?" "Anywhere safer than here," Mark replied. He didn't know exactly where, but he knew the old tunnels beneath the colony. Abandoned shafts, sewers, hidden passages. If they moved through shadows, they might slip past the patrols. Lyra clutched the blanket tight, fear flickering across her face. "Bad men, find us." Mark placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Not if we're careful. Not if we stick together." She hesitated, then nodded. Together. The streets were alive with danger that night. Patrols marched in pairs, lanterns swinging as they checked alleys and doorways. Drunken bounty hunters staggered along, calling out cruel jokes about the glowing brat. Mark carried a small sack with what little he owned, bread, water, and an old revolver with only 2 bullets left. His other hand gripped Lyra's small fingers as they slipped out the back of the cabin. They moved through the narrow alleys, staying close to the shadows. Lyra's glow was faint, but even that could betray them. Mark wrapped her in an old cloak, pulling the hood low over her head. "Stay close," he whispered. Her small voice answered, "I will." They reached the edge of the colony where the old sewer grate waited. Mark pried it open with a rusted crowbar, the metal groaning loudly. He froze, listening. A patrol passed nearby, their boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm. He held his breath until they were gone. Then he helped Lyra climb into the dark tunnel. She hesitated, looking down into the blackness. "Scary," she whispered. "I'll be right behind you," Mark said. "Always." She nodded and slid down into the shadows. The tunnels were damp and narrow, the stench of rot filling the air. Rats scurried across their path, but Lyra stayed close, clutching Mark's sleeve. Their footsteps echoed faintly on the stone floor. Mark led the way with a small lantern, its weak light bouncing off the slimy walls. He remembered these tunnels from years ago when he was younger, desperate and hiding from debt collectors. Now he was hiding something far more precious. Suddenly voices echoed from above. "Hunters. Check the tunnels. I bet she's hiding down there." Mark cursed under his breath. They had guessed. He pulled Lyra into a side passage, pressing her against the wall as torchlight flickered at the grate above. Shadows moved across the ceiling. One man dropped down into the tunnel, his boots splashing in the water. Mark's grip tightened on the revolver. He raised it slowly, but Lyra grabbed his arm. "No," she whispered. Too loud. The hunter's lantern swung, light spilling across the tunnel. He turned, and his eyes widened as they locked on Mark. "There!" The man shouted. Mark didn't hesitate. He swung the iron crowbar, striking the hunter hard across the jaw. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. "Run!" Mark hissed. They sprinted through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing. Shouts followed, hunters dropping down, chasing them through the maze. Mark's lungs burned, but he pushed forward, dragging Lyra along. They turned corner after corner, the tunnels twisting like a labyrinth. Then they reached a dead end, a collapsed wall blocking the path. Mark cursed, turning to face the oncoming footsteps. He raised the revolver with shaking hands. Only 2 bullets. Not enough. But before the hunters appeared, something strange happened. Lyra stepped forward, her glow brightening. Her small hands trembled, but her eyes burned with determination. "Safe. With Dad," she whispered. Her veins lit up like silver fire, and the collapsed wall began to tremble. Stones shifted, dust falling from the ceiling. With a sudden crack, the rocks split apart, opening a narrow path just big enough for them to crawl through. Mark stared in shock, but Lyra grabbed his hand. "Go!" They crawled through the opening just as the hunters' lanterns came into view. Shouts echoed behind them, but the wall collapsed again, sealing the path. On the other side, Mark gasped for breath, pulling Lyra into his arms. She was weak, her glow dimming again, but she smiled faintly. "See? Safe," she whispered before closing her eyes in exhaustion. Mark held her tightly, his heart pounding. She had saved them. Her secret power wasn't just in her blood, it was growing, awakening. But the danger wasn't over. The colony wouldn't stop hunting them. The bounty wouldn't vanish, and Lyra's powers, they would only draw more enemies. Mark looked down the dark tunnel stretching ahead. There was no turning back now. Through shadows, through danger, through every trap, he would carry her no matter the cost. The tunnel seemed endless. Mark carried Lyra in his arms, her small head resting on his shoulder. She was weak after using her strange power, her glow faint but steady. Every step echoed through the dark, but Mark didn't stop. He couldn't. The hunters would still be searching, and the patrols wouldn't rest until they caught her. Finally, after what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into the outskirts of the colony, a broken field of rocks and twisted metal where abandoned machines lay rusting. The air was cleaner here, touched with the faint smell of wild plants. For the first time in days, Mark felt a breath of freedom. He set Lyra down gently on a patch of grass. She stirred, her eyes half opening, and whispered, "Where are we?" "Far enough," Mark said softly, scanning the horizon. "For now, we're safe." Lyra looked around, wonder filling her glowing eyes. She touched the grass with trembling fingers as if she had never seen it before. Maybe she hadn't. A child born into hatred, hidden away, locked in sacks. This was her first taste of the outside world. Mark's chest tightened. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "We can't go back, Lyra, not ever. The colony isn't our home anymore." Her small hand reached for his. "Then at where home?" Mark didn't have an answer. He looked out at the stars above, faint and distant in the night sky. "We'll find it," he whispered. "Somewhere out there. A place where you don't have to hide." The days that followed were hard. Mark scavenged from old outposts and hunted small creatures for food. They built shelter under the wreck of an ancient mining machine, hiding from the patrols that still searched the colony border. Each night, Lyra grew stronger. Her wounds were gone, her body healthier. She even began to smile more, chasing fireflies in the grass when the moonlight shone bright. But her powers also grew. Sometimes, when she was frightened, the ground trembled under her feet. When she was happy, small sparks of silver light floated in the air around her. Mark watched with a mix of awe and fear. He didn't understand her gift, but he knew it was both a blessing and a danger. One evening, as they sat by a small fire, Lyra leaned against him, chewing on a piece of roasted root. "Mark, why you help me?" she asked suddenly. He looked down at her, surprised. "Because you needed me." She tilted her head. "Other people see me. They turn away, call me cursed, but you stayed." Mark's throat tightened. He stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be thrown away. I know what it feels like when nobody wants you." Her glowing eyes softened. She put down the food and climbed into his lap, curling against his chest. "Not curse, not trash, not alone." Mark held her close, his rough hands gentle against her small back. "No," he whispered. "Not anymore." But peace was fragile. One night, distant lights appeared on the horizon, lanterns moving in formation. Patrols. They were sweeping the fields. Mark's heart sank. He couldn't keep running forever. If they caught them now, they would take Lyra, study her, use her blood for their own gain, or worse. Lyra sensed his fear. She grabbed his sleeve tightly. "Bad men again?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice low. "But this time, I'll protect you." No matter what, the patrols drew closer. Mark stood, pulling Lyra behind him, revolver in hand. Only 2 bullets left against 10 men. His body shook, but his will was firm. If he had to die to keep her safe, then so be it. But before the patrols reached them, Lyra stepped forward. Her glow brightened, her veins shining like rivers of light. Her eyes burned with determination. "Safe. With Dad," she whispered. The earth trembled. The patrols stumbled, shouting in confusion. Silver light exploded around them, blinding their lanterns, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Terrified, they turned and fled into the night, shouting about curses and demons. Mark stared, stunned. Lyra collapsed into his arms, exhausted but alive. He held her tightly, his heart racing. "Dad," she whispered weakly. The word froze him. She had said it before, half by accident, but now she said it with certainty. With love. Mark felt tears burn his eyes. He hugged her close, whispering into her hair. "Yes, Lyra, I'm your dad, always." The night grew quiet again, the stars shining above them. For the first time, Mark didn't feel alone. He wasn't just a tired miner anymore, not just a man struggling to survive. He was a father, and the little alien girl who had been left to die in a sack was no longer unwanted. She had someone. She had him. Together they walked into the unknown, step by step, ready to build a new home. Not cursed, not hunted, not alone. For the first time in his life, Mark had a reason to fight, and for the first time in hers, Lyra had a father.